Okay, so I will not talk about all application, as Daniel said, but just a few examples of application of satellite observations for the solid Earth, ocean, and land waters. Just a few examples. As you know, the Earth system is very complicated, made of atmosphere, ocean, land surfaces, and the solid Earth itself is very complicated with many layers. But for many decades now, we have satellite observations which have proved very useful to study the Earth planet. You know the advantage of satellites. It's very well known. They provide global coverage, very precise measurement, and repeat observations over very long time span. So it's very convenient to study the Earth as a planet. So today I will concentrate on two satellite systems and show you what they have brought to our, in terms of knowledge for the solid Earth, for the ocean, and for the terrestrial waters. The first system, satellite system, is satellite altimetry. I think you heard about it this morning with a talk of Jérôme Benveniste, but I will, or maybe other talks, I don't know, I was not there. And space gravimetry, which is a new system, a new space system, new techniques, which is also, as you will see, very revolutionary for studying the Earth as a planet. So let me start very briefly in explaining how it works. Maybe you have heard about that already, but as I don't know, I explain again. So let me start with satellite altimetry. How does it work? In fact, it's very simple. The satellite has a radar altimeter on board, and which at regular time steps emit a radio signal towards the nadir, which reflects generally on water, and come back to the satellite. And by measuring very precisely the travel time of the radio signal, we can determine the altitude of the satellite above the water surface or sea surface. But this is not enough, because what we want to know is these quantities, that is the height of the sea surface or water surface above a fixed reference, typically reference ellipsoid, which is mathematically defined and which does not change through time. So to know this, having measured this, we need to know something else, which is the altitude of the satellite above this reference. And this altitude is known from precise orbitography techniques, which are now well, I don't know how to say in English, masters. And we can determine very accurately now the altitude of the satellite above this reference surface, and by difference between this quantity and the altimeter range, we get the height of the sea surface above this reference. So a number of corrections have to be applied due to delay due to water vapor in the atmosphere or electron in the ionosphere, but I don't talk about that. So the satellite provides a global coverage of the Earth within a few days. It depends on the satellite orbit, but for some satellites like TOPEX, Poseidon, and the JASON satellite, it is in 10 days, but other satellites I think you have heard about this morning, like Envisat or ERS, the coverage is obtained in 35 days. And we call this time span the orbital cycle. So after maybe 10 days, the satellite flies over exactly the same region of the Earth, and if we are interested in ocean dynamics, for example, we can follow the change through time of the ocean surface. But let me explain something which is very important. In fact, the sea surface height, instantaneous sea surface height, measured by the altimeter satellite, is the sum of two components. One, which is a permanent component, which is related to the Earth's internal structure, and in particular to the seafloor topography, and which reflect the Earth's gravity field. This component, which does not change through time, it's what I call it permanent, and for example, what happens when you have a mass excess, like for example a cement at the seafloor, lying on the seafloor, the sea surface will have a bump, because sea has to remain, the surface of the sea has to remain always perpendicular to the direction of gravity. So if you have a mass anomaly, a positive mass anomaly, you will have a positive sea surface, a positive anomaly in the sea surface. And if you have, for example, a negative mass anomaly at the ocean floor, then the sea surface will mirror this negative anomaly. So independently of ocean dynamics, the sea surface is not flat. It is made of oscillation, permanent oscillation, positive and negative, which at small wavelengths are a kind of gravitational image of the seafloor topography. We'll come back to this because you will see that we, from the knowledge of the sea surface, we have been able to provide global maps of the seafloor topography. This signal is about 1 order of magnitude larger than the oceanographic signal, which is related to ocean dynamics, like ocean tides, ocean currents, and so on. So this has to be kept in mind because I will come back to this slide, because for many years, in fact, satellite altimetry, which in fact is an old technique which has been developed in the mid-70s, the error on a single sea surface height measurement was so big. So it was you can see for the very first mission, like GEO-3 launched in 1975, the uncertainty on a single measurement was on the order of 1 meter. So it improved for the following mission, but even for the CSAT and GeoSat satellites, which are American satellites launched for CSAT in 1978 and GeoSat 1985, this uncertainty was still on the order of several decimeters. So it was much too big to allow the detection of the oceanographic signal, which is typically below or on the order of the 10 centimeter level. So for this very first mission, it was impossible to use altimetry for study the ocean dynamics, but this, as you will see, this mission have been very helpful to determine the Earth's gravity field over the ocean surface. So I come back to the other, sorry. Okay, so what I would like to add is that this permanent sea surface is also called geoid, which is one of the equipotential surface of the Earth's gravity field. And at very long wavelengths, the geoid reflects the shape of the Earth, which is not a sphere, but you can see it's a very irregular shape with positive anomaly over Iceland, negative anomaly south of India, etc. And superimposed to these very long wavelengths, you have short wavelengths which have been mapped by satellite altimetry, and I will show you a number of slides. So this irregular shape of the Earth or of the geoid is directly related to the internal structure of the Earth, in particular to mantle convection, where the positive rising mantle currents in general coincide with the positive anomalies of the geoid, and inversely the place where lithospheric plates penetrate into the mantle correspond to negative anomalies. It's a little more complicated, but it's a simplified picture of that. So now, just to explain briefly the other techniques before showing you a number of examples. The second technique I will focus on today is space gravimetry. Space gravimetry is a new technique which has been developed in the recent year, and the first mission, GRACE, which in fact has been developed by NASA in America and by DLR in Germany, was launched in 2002 with the objective of measure the gravity field. But for the first time, the objective was not to measure the permanent component of the Earth's gravity field, but for the first time, the objective was to measure the temporal variation of the Earth's gravity field. So how does it work? In fact, this mission is composed of 2 satellites, which are about 150 kilometers apart. And when the first satellite, so imagine that the direction of velocity is that way. If there is a positive mass anomaly at the surface of the Earth, whatever it is, then the first satellite will accelerate and the distance will increase. Then when the second satellite will fly over this positive anomaly, the distance will decrease. And by measuring, by following or measuring this change in relative distance between the 2 satellites, it is possible to map the mass anomalies at the surface of the Earth, or in fact what the satellite measure is gravity. But for the first time, a complete map, I mean a global map of the Earth's gravity field is obtained every month, so that it is possible to follow the change of the Earth's gravity through time. And this is really the first time it was made. Okay, now it's important to recall that about 99% of the signal which is measured by the satellites is due to the permanent, is related to the permanent the permanent component and related to the solid structures. It does not vary through time. At least it does not vary over the time scale we are looking at. It varies over geological time scale, of course, but not over a few years. But superimposed to this permanent component, GRACE measure also temporal variation, which are related to surface mass redistribution within the atmosphere, within the ocean, and over land surfaces in relation to the water cycle, and over the ice sheets like Greenland and Antarctica. GRACE is able to measure, for example, as we will see, the loss of mice of Greenland and Antarctica. So GRACE, of course, measures the permanent component of the Earth's gravity field, and here you have a map which has been, which is based mostly on GRACE, and you can see the very. I will not spend much time, but a lot of signal related over the ocean, related to the seafloor topography, and over the continent related to mountain range and other features. So now, concerning the temporal component, the temporal variation, each month since April 2002, we have maps of the mass redistribution of the Earth's surface, and over the continents, what GRACE is measuring is the change in total water storage in river basins. And I will show you an example at the end of the talk. So it was a very brief presentation of the techniques. So now I will explain you a number of, I will show you a number of scientific application of these techniques. And let me start with satellite altimetry. So we have seen already this picture. And it's important to recall that satellite altimetry has been originally developed to study the ocean. But as I said previously, for about 20 years, it was not possible to use these techniques to study the ocean, but rather it was used to study the marine geoid, so the gravity field. So it is only in the early 90s with new missions like TOPAX Poseidon and JSON-1, Envisat, and now we have other satellites like JSON-2 launched in 2008, that the accuracy or precision of a single sea surface measurement is small enough to study the ocean. But let me show you a number of examples, a number of applications of this early mission, and in particular, maps of the marine geoid which have been obtained using, that is, measuring the permanent sea surface, the permanent surface of the ocean. So here you can see the short wavelength ondulation of the sea surface, the permanent component, obtained by satellite altimetry observation. And what you immediately recognize on this picture is the signature of the main of tectonic plates. That is, here you can see in the Atlantic the signature of the mid-Atlantic ridge. You can see the signature of volcanic chain, for example, Hawaii, you see here, sorry. And, and these small dots here correspond to seamounts. And you have also fracture zones and also, for example, here, subduction zones in a number of places. Just a close-up view here in the Indian Ocean, where you can see very clearly the gravitational image, in fact, of the seafloor features, with the ridge here, fracture zones, highland chains, and so on. The scale is not here, I'm sorry, but the amplitude of these anomalies are on the order of a few meters, between 1 and 5 meters. And they directly reflect the main boundaries of plate tectonics. So what we measure is the sea surface. But as you have seen, the sea surface is a kind of gravitational image of the seafloor topography. So by numerical inversion techniques, it's possible to use this measurement, the sea surface measurement, to deduce the seafloor topography. And this has been done over the last decade by several groups. And just to show you here a close-up view in the Southwest Pacific, here you have Australia, New Guinea, and you can see, so now it's no more the sea surface, but it's seafloor topography or bathymetry in meters. So you can see how complicated it is in this region. And here it's north of New Zealand, which is here, and the Tonga-Kermadec subduction zone. Here you can see how complicated is this region and so on. So global maps of the seafloor topography or bathymetry have been obtained, and with a lot of application in marine geophysics and even for economic application like petroleum exploration, also for fishing. It's very important to have this kind of products which can be obtained only from space, from satellites. Now I move to some oceanographic application, and these are based on this new satellite mission. The launch of Topex Poseidon in 1992 was the beginning of what we call the high precision altimetry era, and the successor of Topex, JSON 1 and JSON 2, which are still functioning today, are currently used to study the ocean. We have also other satellites like Envisat, which is also used to study the ocean. So with this satellite, the precision of a single sea surface height measurement is now is today on the order of 1 to 2 centimeters. That is this, and only with this kind of precision, you can study, for example, silver rise, a topic I will talk more in a moment. But with the Topex Poseidon and JSON observation, a number of very important achievements in oceanography have been obtained. For example, it has been shown that, like the atmosphere, the ocean is turbulent, and about 80 or 90% of the total kinetic energy of the ocean is in the mesoscale features. Topex Poseidon observation have been used also to study the El Nino phenomenon, which is one of the largest perturbation of the atmosphere ocean system. And the last very big, it is not the last, but the largest in terms of intensity event was the 1997-1998 El Nino. And here you have pictures showing the development of this event, and it has been followed from its initiation until the end of this event, which lasted about 1 year or several months. And these observations have been very useful to better understand this phenomenon, and it was used further for trying to predict this kind of events. Altimetry, high precision altimetry data have been used also to improve ocean tides, and an important application of this data set is to follow sea level rise, and I will talk more now. I will spend a few minutes to explain you what we know today about this problem. Just to recall, 20,000 years ago, the Earth was, the climate was a glacial climate with several kilometer thick ice on the northern hemisphere of the Earth. So it was the last glacial maximum, and sea level was about, here you have a sea level curve, since minus 100, how do you say, 100? Okay, thank you. So at the last glacial maximum, about 20,000 years ago, sea level on average, in terms of global average, was about 120 meters below present sea level. And when the glaciation finished, the climate warmed up and sea level rose until about 3,000 years ago where it reached a stable state. So from a number of geological and also archaeological observation, we think that during the last 2003 to 2000 years, sea level did not change much. But then, at the end of the 19th century, sea level started to rise again. And this is we know this from tide gauge observation, tide gauge have been installed in ports originally to study ocean tides, but they have proved to be very useful to study the long-term evolution of sea level. And here you have a few examples of tide gauge records, for example, here at New York, Honolulu, Brest, and Buenos Aires, since 1900. And you see clearly a positive trend, which means sea level rise. So putting together all these observations based on tide gauge, that is along continental coastline only, we can derive this kind of curve which shows the evolution of the mean sea level. Here the curve starts in 1870. So you see a modest rise until about 1930, and then a more clear rise. And for the last 50 years, where the data are more accurate, we estimate the rate of rise at about 1.8 millimeter per year. The difference between the blue and red curves is just because the curves are obtained by two different groups. But you can see that there is very good agreement between the two curves. And since the beginning of the 90s, we now measure sea level using satellite altimetry. And here is a curve since January 1993. And this curve here, the white curve, represents the global mean sea level. And here we can really say global because we have this global coverage of the ocean allowed by satellite altimetry, which was not the case, of course, when using tide gauge. So the blue points at the raw data obtained every 10 days, the orbital cycle, and the red curve is a smooth version of the raw data. So what do you see here? You see a clear rise, some oscillation, but a clear positive rise. And if we compute the trend, the rate, we get a rate of 3.3 millimeter per year, which is almost twice the value obtained for the last 50 years. This bump here, positive anomaly, is related to the 1997-1998 El Nino. And this negative here is related to the recent La Nina event, which occurred in 2007. So, as I said, we have a rate of rise for the last 15 or now 16 years, which is about twice the rate of rise of the last 5 decades. Do we see an acceleration in this phenomenon, or is it just a decadal fluctuation? Well, we don't know yet because it's still a short record, but it is important to say that since year about 2000, the rate of rise from satellite altimetry is very constant. If I come back to the previous slide, oh, sorry. Here, adding 1 year, for example, 1 year of data, updating this curve since year about 2000, after the El Nino event, does not change the rate. Always we find 3.3 millimeter per year. So, cannot say more, but it seems that it's not fluctuating on interannual time scale. Another very important result from satellite altimetry, which was not possible earlier with tide gauge because of the poor coverage of tide gauge, is the mapping of the sea level weights, global mapping of sea level weights, and the upper map here shows the regional variability in sea level rates or trends over this 16-year period. You can see that sea level is not rising uniformly. In some regions which correspond to the orange and red color, the rate of rise is up to 3 times the global mean. The global mean is 3.3 millimeter per year, so you can see that in this region, we have nearly 1 centimeter or more than 1 centimeter per year over the last 15 to 16 years. Here, the bottom map is in fact the same, but here we have removed this uniform trend of 3.3, and this allows highlighting this regional variability. And you can see very clearly the regions which are rising faster than the global mean. That is the Western Pacific, the Austral Ocean, North Atlantic around Greenland, Central Atlantic, and so on. We know the reason. I will come back to this. We know the reason now, and we know it is related to ocean warming, which is also not uniform. So now I move to the cause. On the time scale you are looking at, that is a few years to a few decades, the two main causes of sea level rise are ocean warming, that is thermal expansion of seawater. The ocean, we know from observation that during the past few decades, oceans have warmed. So sea level, so this causes thermal expansion of seawater and sea level rise. This is one cause. The other cause is the change of the ocean mass, that is water input addition from land ice melt, for example, and from terrestrial waters related to the water cycle. I will show you a few examples later. So what do we know about these two contributions? We are lucky because for a few years now, let's say about a decade, we have a lot of observation, and we are able to compute each of these contributions. That is the thermal expansion contribution, land ice contribution, and terrestrial waters. So let me start with the ocean temperature contribution. During the last 50 years, in situ temperature data have been collected by ships, for example, by buoys and mooring. And for the last few decades, in fact, the data, ocean temperature data, come mainly from ships, and the coverage corresponds to ship routes with very poor coverage in the southern hemisphere. Anyway, these data have been very useful to look at the change, the evolution of the ocean heat content over the past few decades. Since a few years, we have now a new system, which is called Argo. Sorry, the name is not here. It's an international program of profiling floats, which measure temperature and salinity every, let's say, 40 days, down in the ocean, down to about 2,000 meters, and with global coverage. So this is really revolutionary to study, to follow the evolution of the ocean heat content. So with this data set, it has been possible to compute the thermal expansion contribution to sea level. And here, because we don't have any data earlier than about 1955, the curve, which are shown here, two curves because it's data from two groups, only start at this date. So the blue curves represent the evolution over the last 50 years of the thermal expansion contribution to sea level. The trend, if we compute a rate or trend, we find about 1.4. Recall that the observed rate of rise over the last 50 years was 1.8 millimeter per year. So it's a small contribution. but it's not negligible, but it's small. And if we compute the residual sea level, that is, if we remove from the observed sea level this contribution, we get the red curves here. Again, two curves because we have two estimates of thermal expansion. And if we compute in terms of trend the contribution, we get a value of 1.4. So what does this mean? This means that for the last 50 years, the ocean warming contribution was small, about 25% of the observed rate of rise, and there was a large contribution from the ocean mass, that is water coming from land ice or land waters. But the problem is that we have no observation to directly estimate the land ice contribution over the last 50 years, which is not the case. So I moved. Which is not the case, as you will see, for the last decade or so. So this was for the last 50 years. Now, how is it for the altimetric period, that is since 1993? Here we have the observed rate of rise. It is in fact the same curve as before, but just expressed here in terms of annual average. Here it's thermal expansion contribution, again two curves because of two data sets from two different groups, and the residual sea level. But now we can compare this residual sea level, that is the difference between the black curve and the blue curve, with direct estimate of the land ice contribution. And we will see that we find a very good agreement. So what is the situation for the last 15 years or 16 years? We have a rate of rise of 3.3 millimeter per year, and a thermal expansion contribution of about 30%, 1 millimeter per year, and a residual sea level, that is an ocean mass increase, expressed in terms of equivalent sea level of 2.3 millimeter per year. Again, even for the recent years, we find that the mass component is larger than the thermal expansion component. Just briefly, I said we have seen that sea level is not rising uniformly. Some regions are rising faster than others. So this is the observed rate of rise. And we can, with ocean temperature data or with ocean models, we can estimate, we can show, in fact, that these patterns are directly due to non-uniform ocean warming with a small contribution from salinity. So if you compare, here it's not temperature, in fact, it's thermal expansion. You computed with in situ temperature data. You can see that if you compare the observed patterns with thermal expansion pattern, you can see a very close agreement. So most of this non-uniform or sea level regional variability is due to non-uniform ocean warming. So what is this so? We don't know yet, we don't know exactly why, but we think it's related to the way the heat is transported by ocean circulation laterally and from the surface to the deep ocean. So, 6 minutes? 6 minutes? Wow. So I think I will not talk about land waters. So briefly, what about the land ice contribution? We have observation for the glaciers and for the ice sheets. You all know that mountain glaciers are retreating worldwide, and there have been many groups. Many groups have tried to estimate the total change in ice mass from melting glaciers. And for example, here for the period for the decade 1995 to 2005, you have estimates from different investigators for the rate of ice mass loss from mountain glaciers, And you see that on average, it is on the order of 300 gigaton per year, with a slight increase over the recent years. So translated in terms of sea level, this corresponds to about 0.8 millimeter per year sea level rise. So what about the ice sheets? So I think I will have to move about the process, but just to show you what the observations say. Clearly, Antarctica and Greenland are losing ice. And it has been discovered that the region, for example, the coastal region of southern Greenland are losing ice, and this map here are based on satellite altimetry also. With satellite altimetry, you can measure change in sea level, but you can also measure the change in elevation of the ice sheets. So this can be translated in terms of ice mass loss. And the blue color corresponds to regions which have been, where the elevation has been decreasing, here for Greenland and here for West Antarctica. So with GRACE also, we can directly measure the change in mass of the ice sheets. And again, what we find with GRACE, the blue color corresponds to a decrease in mass for Greenland here, and here for West Antarctica. And oh, sorry, there is a typo error here. The trend estimated here for the recent year, because the curve starts in 2002, we find a negative trend for this region of minus 150 gigaton per year, which correspond to about 0.5 millimeter per year sea level rise. So taking all this observation together, so several investigators are trying to estimate the mass balance of the ice sheet using GRACE or using altimetry. Also, another remote sensing technique has been used. It's called INSAR, which provides information on the rate, on the flow velocity of coastal glaciers. And here we have a synthesis of all recent results which have been obtained for the mass balance of the Greenland ice sheet. So it's the plot here starts in 1992 up to now. It's in terms of ice mass loss, ice mass change. So you can see that all results are negative, meaning the Greenland is losing ice. And you can see a clear acceleration in the recent years in the process. We have the same for Antarctica, in particular for West Antarctica, with a slight increase in West Antarctica. So now, with all these observations, we can look at the sea level budget. That is, compare the observed rate of sea level rise with independent estimate for ocean warming or thermal expansion and land ice. So what we get, so I show first this decade, 1993 to 2003, because it was the time span which was considered by the last IPCC report published in 2007. And afterwards, if I have time, I will show you recent results since 2003 where things are totally different, as you will see. So what was the sea level budget for that decade? So glaciers estimated to 0.8 millimeter per year. Ice sheet, the sum of the two ice sheets, about 0.5. The steric or thermal expansion component was estimated to about 1.5 millimeter per year. And if we sum up all this contribution, we get here the sum of the climate-related contribution. And here are the observation. So you can see that the sea level budget was not totally closed, but maybe the difference here may be due to the missing contribution from land waters. So now, what happened since 2003? Since 2003, ocean temperature data indicates that ocean warming is showing a plateau. That is, there is a small increase in thermal expansion, but at a rate which is much lower than during the previous decade. But what is surprising is that sea level is still rising. So this, to explain this continuing or increase in sea level, while we have no contribution from the ocean, means an increased contribution from land ice. And it is exactly what we are observing. Okay, so just to show you the results, if we can compute the estimate, the contribution of land ice for the recent years by several manners or several ways. First, we can use the remote sensing observations over the ice sheet, and we get, and also take into account the glaciers contribution, and we get this curve here. But we can also look with GRACE at the increase of the ocean mass, directly looking, averaging the observation, the GRACE observation over the ocean, and have an estimate of the ocean mass increase. So this is this curve. And you can see that both correspond very well and almost explain what we are observing. That is the continuing rate of rise of satellite altimetry. So if we look at the sea level budget for the recent year, what we see is an accelerated contribution of land ice. With GRACE, we are also able to compute the land water contribution, small contribution. The steric or thermal expansion contribution is small, but if we sum up all this contribution, in fact, we are able to close the sea level budget. But what does this mean? It means that for the recent years, land ice is now contributing to 80% to the observed rate of sea level rise. And I think I will stop there. And as we think that this recent flattening of thermal expansion is probably a short-term internal short-term variability of the system, of the climate system, but it's not. It does not mean that the ocean is no more warming. Just some an oscillation, and probably the increase will thermal expansion will rise again. So in the coming year, if land ice loss continue to accelerate, and ocean warming rise again, probably we will observe a rate of rise in sea level much larger than today. Okay, I think my time is over. Just one word about future sea level. This curve here is from the last IPCC report. So here we have the observations, the same curve as the one I showed at the beginning, with the tide gauge observation, the altimetry curve, and these are the projections from the climate models. But at the time the IPCC report was prepared, this feature here, that is the acceleration of land ice loss from Greenland and Antarctica, were just beginning to be observed. So the mechanism behind this observation were not well understood. They start to be understood. I skip that because I have no time to go into the detail, but I can answer questions if you want. Anyway, the dynamical behavior of the ice sheet was not taken into account in the climate model used for the projection. So the value here, that is about 35 centimeters above present-day sea level by 2100, is certainly, now is believed by most people working on that topic, to be a lower bound. And if the kind of process we are observing for the ice sheet continue for the next few years and decades, no doubt that the future sea level in terms of global mean will be well above this 35 centimeters. And in addition to that, we have this regional variability, which is not taken into account by the model at the present time. So I stop there. I have no time to talk about land water application, but Jérôme Benveni's talk gave a presentation this morning, so maybe next year.